Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to this ad hoc live, News24 live, coming to you from the Nasrec Convention Center, where the ANC is in its final day of its policy conference. It's been 3 days of discussions around the party's policy, the implementation thereof, and what does this mean for the state. Now, it appears to have been, the mood has been quite subdued than what anticipated, and obviously last night there was discussions that continued late into the evening around the economy, around organizational renewal, and on other topics including governance and safety and security. Now, joining me today is News24 columnist and author Mpumelelo Mkhabela. Thank you very much for your time. You've been here at the conference since Friday. It has been muted, number one. We can agree to that the tone has been a lot more calmer than anticipated. But also, when we hear the feedback from the different commissions, it didn't appear that anything controversial really found footing at this policy conference. Certainly,
there has not been controversy in terms of policy discussions. In the main, my analysis is that the ANC isn't interested in radical shifts. They basically want to maintain what they have, broadly speaking, try to refine that and there, and to appear to be doing something around policy review, around reinvigorating, just assuring South Africans that they're still in charge, they can still do things better. That's the impression that they're trying to create overall.
And I think that what was important for me is that there was a lot of repetition around policy proposals and resolutions of the ANC that have been taken before, and that is, the reassertion of the argument around the ANC government must establish a state bank. That was a resolution of the last conference, and again, that's appeared to be some of the sticking points here, which is a bit unusual because that was already a policy decision of the ANC. Yes, it was not implemented, but I found that it was quite fascinating to see. There was not an attempt to reinvent the wheel, but rather to reassert the existing controversial and somewhat even arguably unworkable resolutions that were passed or were raised previously.
And that's a problem. I mean, if you look at the resolution or the discussion around there has to be a state-owned bank, for example, or the expropriation of land without compensation, the ANC remains static in those positions. It reiterates those positions. But at the same time, the problems that these resolutions are supposed to resolve, they keep shifting. I mean, think, for example, let's look at the state bank. At the time when they were resolving that, from the beginning, when this idea was first mooted, right?
Over 10 years ago.
Yes. Since then, just think about how many private banks in South Africa have been launched. Think about Bank Zero. Think about Discovery Bank. Think about, African Bank fell, and then the Reserve Bank came in and bailed them out. They're now back on their feet, profitable. Think about how Capitec over the last 10 years has risen to be one of the top banks in the country. And there are so many things that have happened in the private sector. Yet the government keeps on sticking to that thing that we need a state bank. Remember, in the beginning, one of the ideas was that the banks are like monopoly, they don't compete and all of that. But the space has been opening up. The space has been very competitive in the banking sector.
So why can you assess then why, in what vein is this thing being brought up again this time around? Because the land has shifted, right? So, and it's not the same debate. You're not hearing those tag words of white monopoly capital and the monopolization of certain industries. You're not hearing it, but you're hearing an effort to bring back these controversial policies of the ANC.
It's because the ANC is in government, and the ANC in government wants to convince people that as a party in government responsible for the state can solve everything.
Right.
So that's why you hear that we need state ownership of the bank, we need the Reserve Bank to be nationalized, and that type of thing, because the assumption is that if the state controls these things, then the ANC as a party in government will be able to use these state institutions to solve things like unemployment, access to credit and all of that. But as I say, the underlying research does not support these resolutions. If they were actually going to do the research, what's happening in the private sector, and you also do research, what does the state actually currently has in its possession? It's got the Development Bank of Southern Africa, it's got the IDC, it's got the National Empowerment Fund, it's got the Land Bank.
Yes.
All of these institutions are state-owned. If you combine them, you look at the assets that they have, and their capacity to raise capital, it's quite huge. So the question is, why do you need another state bank? There was a time when they actually were talking about they want the state to be involved in retail banking.
Yes.
The state is actually partially involved in that because the state actually owns part of African Bank as we speak via the Reserve Bank, and the Reserve Bank now wants to offload its stake because the African Bank is now up on its own. So the ANC policies or proposals, they remain constant, but the underlying assumptions that keep on changing.
Yeah.
So I think that from that perspective, there's no dynamism in the policy making system of the ANC. That's why when the delegates come here, they are holding the leadership responsible for making policy, accountable for not delivering old policies. But nobody is able to say, listen,
this was unworkable in the first place.
Yeah, and things have shifted.
Yes.
So maybe let's refine it and change it.
President Cyril Ramaphosa, when he addressed the opening of the conference, says he does not want to see any wishy-washy resolutions. However, when we heard from the chairpersons of the different subcommittees that came to present on what was happening at the commissions, you still saw some fanciful ideas coming, proposals around the establishment of a youth ministry, when in fact you have an entire ministry dedicated to women, children and people with disabilities. You also heard David Matlobo talking about the ANC wanting to establish its own internal anti-corruption unit of sort. I don't know what that would look like. You heard Lindiwe Sisulu talking about chemical castration, which experts have already debunked to say this is not viable and it's extremely expensive anyways. And so what you're still seeing is this disconnect between reality and discussions that are happening behind closed doors at these commissions here at the policy conference.
Yes, again, it's a question of the ANC wanting to be seen to be in charge, wanting to be seen to be coming up with new things, wanting to be seen to be refining its policies, even though some of these things are not supported by evidence or by scientific research.
Yeah.
If you think, for example, one of the issues we are mentioning, like the splitting of the Ministry of Women and
having
the
a youth ministry.
Yes. The ANC has always done this. If you look at actually from the Jacob Zuma presidency up to now, and you look at how many times departments have been split,
it's almost like a gerrymandering of the executive.
And all of that. Yes. So it always gives the current government or whoever is in charge the impression that I'm in charge and I'm doing things. I can reshuffle cabinet, or I can change ministries, I can merge departments. So, but the reality is that if you split youth from women, I'm not sure whether it will add any value. And there's always this idea that if there's a problem, isolate it and give it a ministry. And if you isolate it and give it a ministry, you have actually, in their conception, solved the problem. I don't think that will work that way. So nobody's saying why, for example, the NYDA is not working for the young people, because it's an isolated entity.
Yes, that reports to the presidency.
It's given its budget. It's run by young people, mostly from the ANC. Why is it not working? So why do you now need a ministry? And in any event, if you look at the women ministry, the current ministry as it is currently structured, what have they done? Has there been a report to this conference to say this is our role, this is what we've done, this is our limitations? I don't think I get anything like that.
Mpumelelo, coming into this conference, we spoke a lot about the proxy debates that would feature and would take over. Obviously, the center of all of this, and we've been hearing it over and over and over, and at the risk of being, overkill in our discussion, is this step aside thing, which it has become manifestly clear that the ANC in KwaZulu-Natal tried very hard to put this on the agenda, to repeal it. But you heard people like Mandla Ndlovu, who's the ANC chairperson in Mpumalanga, say you scrap aside, you scrap ANC in government. The president making that point in commissions. You heard Treasurer General Paul Mashatile saying the same thing. Even former presidents Thabo Mbeki and Kgalema Motlati weighing in on it. But it kind of seems now on the last day of conference that you're not going to see any radical shift against that policy, because the ANC knows very well that if it appears to be undoing its own reform efforts, no matter how hollow they may have been, then it would not bode well for them, especially with the electorate.
Instead of a reversal of step aside and other anti-corruption measures, in fact, what we are seeing is that the ANC wants to be in line with the public perception in society that it has failed on corruption. So it's now wanting to counter that perception. So it's now saying we want to implement all the the reports, whether it's the Review Panel on Intelligence,
Yes.
State Capture Commission, the Zondo Commission report, David Mahlobo yesterday emphasizing that the ANC wants to implement all these reports.
The irony of it is he's implicated in those
That's
reports.
always the irony of all of the people that are making all these anti-corruption announcements. They themselves are involved in it. But there's a rider. There's something that he kept on repeating yesterday when he was briefing, which is interesting, that the law must have no eyes. So everyone must be treated equally.
And you'll
So
see that sentiment, I think, come out when there's a resolution that to say there must be this non-partisan, even though it may be non-partisan by the NPA, but there's this effort to say the law must be consistent with all of us.
Yeah, because the underlying assumption there is that there's been biasness. Some people have been targeted. So that's why he kept on raising this issue that we support the rule of law, but the law must have no eyes. So in other words, the law must be applied consistently across the board, regardless of which factions someone belongs to. So I think from that perspective, they've moved away from the idea of potentially reversing the step aside. So instead, they are now adding more initiatives to say we want to deal with corruption, like for example the new internal anti-corruption agents that they are talking about. But they're not actually telling us why the current system is not working.
Yes.
Because from my perspective, if you look at all of the rules in government,
Yes.
the anti-corruption laws, all of the laws governing public finance management and all of that, they are very strong in terms of anti-corruption.
And they must explain why the NPA is underfunded. Why is forensic capacity of the Hawks and of the South African Police Services has been diminishing year in and year out. Those are real issues that contribute to why you have this inconsistency in the criminal justice system.
Exactly. Why are our courts clogged with a lot of cases, and why is the ratio of police numbers per population, why has that been deteriorating? So those are some of the things that they should be dealing with, so to convince the public that they are actually dealing with corruption. Look, there's a real sense that if they are not seen to be dealing with corruption harshly, the public will punish them. But not everyone sees it that way. I think the KZN lobby doesn't see it that way. I think they actually think that the ANC is somehow invincible. They can win regardless of, open doors to corrupt people to come into the ANC. So I think some people still regard the ANC as this kind of like big movement which cannot be, removed from power, regardless of the recent electoral trends.
Mpumelelo Mkhabela, thank you very much for your time. We are obviously going to watch the outcome and the decisions of this conference and listen attentively to when the President eventually closes the conference later this afternoon. Thank you very much for your time. But I think there are some still important discussions that are underway in the plenary as we speak. There's a report back on the Economic Transformation Commission and some of the proposals there. Obviously, the big issues that the President when he opened this conference was issues around the economy, issues around Eskom, and obviously the huge problems around joblessness in this country. Now, joining me is Carol Paton, writer at large at News24. Thank you very much for your time. Carol, you've been watching the Economic Transformation Commission and the issue around the economy quite broadly at this conference. Yesterday you heard from Mpumelelo Mkhabela, who is the chairperson of that Economic Transformation Subcommittee, and she sort of spelled out what was the sentiment during the commissions. What did you make of it?
Well, it was a little bit garbled, her account, I have to admit, partly because the commission actually wasn't finished deliberating, and they came out and gave us sort of a report to some extent of what had happened so far. And it does seem to be the case that, like in other commissions, the kind of mainstream of the ANC sort of kept a lid on things. Yes, all the radical economic transformation resolutions from 2017 that were carried around the Reserve Bank, around the expropriation of land, about the State Bank, all of those things were again raised by delegates, which I think, as you and Mpumelelo were discussing, shows the extent to which these policy conferences are often just detached from reality, because there are real practical and pragmatic reasons as to why those things haven't been implemented. But on the whole, I think that the President's energy plan was carried, the plan he announced this week, and delegates who had gone into this conference saying, you're giving away too much to the private sector. seem to be reassured that, yes, this is an interim thing, but also we're going to build up Eskom, and they put that as a rider onto the plan. Eskom needs
So no
to be
real
strengthened.
opposition to the president's plan then, because there's sort of no real alternative.
Yes, I think there was agreement that yes, we have to do this now. This is a plan to end load shedding soon, quickly now. But it doesn't mean we're abandoning Eskom. It doesn't mean we're shrinking Eskom. It doesn't mean we're abandoning our role as a state. And to say we're going to strengthen Eskom, which quite honestly is a very, very important part of energy security. I mean, Eskom is still, as Gwede Mantashe likes to say, it's the base load, and we need it to work.
And so there was this discussion around the disintegration of the Department of Public Enterprises. This has not been the first time we've heard this. It's been long debated around whether you need this department to handle certain public state-owned entities, because there's hundreds of SOEs that sit within different competencies in government. And so there's this push to say maybe Eskom must be moved from the Department of Public Enterprises to the Department of Energy. Do you think this will fly?
Look, as you've been saying a little while earlier, this is a policy conference. It's consultative. No decisions are actually made here. So I definitely take that one with a pinch of salt, because I think that when you start to examine the intricacies and the difficulties, it's not as easy as it sounds just to relocate responsibility from one department to another. You know, over the years, there's been such heated debate over this, and it's been one of those proxy debates because
it depends on who's the minister at the time.
So if you're unhappy with Pravin Gordhan and you're wanting to fire a few shots at him, then that's one way to do it. And so that's why I don't buy the whole thing completely. I think more importantly, in terms of the overall agenda for state-owned enterprises, what it shows us is that we're still stuck in the same place. We're still debating, ANC is still debating, where should they go, what is their role, how should they work. And Pravin Gordhan had actually formulated a plan which is quite forward-thinking and progressive, actually, to say let's form a holding company, let's put all those entities with a commercial mandate, so your Eskom, your PRASA, those sorts of things, put them under this holding company, which could then be run on much more commercial lines, and run less like a government department and more like
and the
commercial entities.
The president once reflected on this, if I recall, saying that he's attracted to the way they do it in Singapore, for example, saying that you have SOEs running as this major big state-owned enterprise, and so it doesn't have the same level of political interference or vulnerability than is the case.
Isn't that the whole question then? Because
yes.
Look, I think that this isn't quite the same, because I think that the model that Pravin Gordhan is proposing is one that would enable more private participation in those companies. And as we know, the state is so cash-strapped that it needs to get money from somewhere. So this is a solution to that problem. The fact that it's not going to fly, I think, is...
Was it raised? Did Mpumelelo Mkhabela reflect on that at all?
She said it was not raised.
Okay.
It was in the discussion paper. We know that Pravin Gordhan wants to do it. He's spoken about it in his budget vote. He said he's putting a bill before cabinet. And we know that he's been working on it for at least the last 2 years. So it didn't actually fly. It was tentatively put into the discussion papers, but there was no traction on it. And I think that speaks to, once again, the political strength of someone like Pravin Gordhan in a forum like this, where he's under siege from quite a number of different quarters who don't agree with him, who think that he's responsible for the collapse of state-owned enterprises, when in fact,
as a proxy rebellion argument,
exactly,
yeah.
which in fact that's completely not true. I mean, the reason they're collapsing was because of the so-called 9 wasted years.
Yes, and the nuance are so many nuanced issues that sometimes can be technical and sometimes political, and I think that in forums like this ANC policy conference, where delegates stand up and say things, things, the nuance is lost, and the depth of discussion is always of concern. And that's something I observed when the ANC NEC members came and reported back around issues, of what was discussed at these commissions, that it appeared to be, these ideas without consideration of what is the situation at the moment, and how would that work in the future.
One thing I did like about what Mpumelelo Mkhabela said, because this debate around the Reserve Bank and the mandate of the Reserve Bank, because our Reserve Bank has quite a narrow mandate, and they're quite hawkish, so they interpret it quite rigidly.
Yeah.
That is to pursue inflation,
Yes.
to keep inflation down. And one of the things she did say is that yes, this debate came up once again, and the resolution or the agreement in the Commission was that there should be some research into this.
Yes.
Should be some proper research. So I think that's a really good starting point. I think it's going to come back, this issue. It's always going to come back into ANC conferences. But I think if some credible research was done that could then be presented as a solid case to the conference, the next conference, and subsequent conferences, that would be a very good starting point. I think the difficulty is that we haven't got a lot of people in this collective of the ANC, even in the leadership collective, and never mind the delegates, who actually really understand how the economy works. So they're on the back foot in trying to explain why these things are important.
Absolutely. Thank you very much for your time, Carol Paton. She is the writer-at-large for FRONTLINE. Thank you very much for watching this discussion. We've been coming to you live from the ANC Policy Conference here at Nazareth Convention Centre, the south of Johannesburg. Keep up to date with all our coverage from the ANC Policy Conference. On News24.com, we have live updates, regular interviews, and we will bring you President Cyril Ramaphosa live when he closes this conference later this afternoon. Thank you for joining.